The biting cold of February 1878 penetrated Delilah Zimmerman's bones as she stood trembling at the altar. Her white wedding gown dusted with fresh snowflakes that drifted through the damaged church roof. The stained glass windows cast colored light across her tear-streaked face as the priest's sympathetic expression confirmed what she already knew. Henry Caldwell wasn't coming. "I'm sorry, Miss Zimmerman," the priest whispered, his breath visible in the frigid air of Valentine, Nebraska's only church. "Perhaps we should tell the guests." Delilah's gloved fingers clutched the small bouquet of winter flowers until several stems snapped. The 30 wedding guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, whispering as minutes stretched into an unbearable half-hour of waiting. Her mother's quiet sobs from the front pew only amplified her humiliation. "He's not coming," she finally said, her voice stronger than she felt. "Everyone knows it but me." Sheriff Thomas Andrews stood and cleared his throat. "I saw Caldwell boarding the eastbound train this morning, had his bags with him. I thought perhaps." He trailed off awkwardly. The revelation hit Delilah like a physical blow. Henry had left town entirely, not just abandoned her at the altar. The whispers grew louder as she stood frozen, snowflakes melting in her carefully arranged hair, her white gown now seeming like a cruel joke. "Delilah, darling," her mother finally approached, reaching for her arm. "Let's go home." "No." Delilah stepped back, nearly tripping on her train. "I can't. I won't go back to that house where everyone will pity me." Without warning, she gathered her skirts and fled, pushing through the heavy wooden church doors into the snow-covered town square. The cold February air stung her face as she ran blindly, her satin slippers already soaked through. Valentine was experiencing its worst winter in decades. Snow piled in drifts taller than men, and the bitter wind cut through even the thickest coats. Delilah had no destination in mind, only escape from the crushing embarrassment and heartbreak. She didn't hear the approaching hoofbeats until the rider was nearly upon her. When she finally looked up, breathless and shivering, she found herself staring at Wyatt Quinn, sitting tall on his chestnut stallion. Wyatt Quinn was known throughout the county, a mysterious figure who'd arrived in Valentine 3 years prior, buying the struggling cattle ranch north of town and transforming it into one of the most successful operations in the territory. He kept to himself, rarely coming to town except for supplies or business. Some called him standoffish, others whispered about a troubled past. All Delilah knew was that he nodded politely whenever their paths crossed, but they'd exchanged fewer than a dozen words in all that time. "Miss Zimmerman." His deep voice carried concern as he quickly dismounted. "You shouldn't be out in this weather." Delilah suddenly became aware of her appearance, wedding dress soaked at the hem, hair falling from its pins, face streaked with tears and snowflakes. The humiliation was complete. "Mr. Quinn," she acknowledged, attempting dignity despite her state. "I find myself in need of some air." His expression softened with understanding. "The Caldwell boy," he stated rather than asked. "News travels fast in Valentine." "Apparently not fast enough for me to avoid making a fool of myself," she replied bitterly. The wind picked up, sending a violent shiver through her body. Without hesitation, Wyatt unbuttoned his heavy sheepskin coat and draped it over her shoulders. The warmth and weight of it surrounded her immediately, carrying the scent of leather, pine, and something uniquely him. "You're freezing," he said, concern evident in his voice. "Let me take you somewhere warm." "I can't go home," she said, teeth chattering. "I can't face them all." Wyatt paused, looking at her thoughtfully. Then, to her astonishment, he knelt down on one knee in the snow before her, his white shirt now exposed to the elements without his coat. "Then marry me instead." Delilah stared at him, certain she'd misheard. Mr. Quinn? Wyatt, he corrected. And I mean it, Miss Zimmerman. Marry me. You can't be serious, she whispered, wondering if the cold had affected her mind. I am entirely serious, he replied, snow gathering on his broad shoulders. I've admired you from afar since I came to Valentine. You're intelligent, kind, and stronger than you know. Any man who would abandon you doesn't deserve you. You hardly know me, she protested. I know enough, he said simply. I know you help Mrs. Peterson with her children when she's ill. I know you teach the McKinley children to read, though their father thinks education is wasted on girls. I know you have the strongest spirit of anyone in this town. Delilah felt lightheaded, and not just from the cold. People will think we're both mad. People will talk regardless, he replied. But I'm offering you respect, security, and a partnership. The rest can grow in time. Another violent shiver ran through her body as the wind whipped around them. We should continue this conversation somewhere warmer, he said, rising to his feet. Will you come to my ranch, just to talk? My housekeeper will be there as chaperone. Delilah hesitated only a moment before nodding. The alternative, returning home to face everyone's pity, was unthinkable. Wyatt helped her onto his horse, then mounted behind her, one arm securely around her waist as they rode away from town. Delilah could feel the warmth of him against her back, a stark contrast to the icy wind. She'd never been this close to a man other than Henry, and the realization made her blush despite the cold. Why would you want to marry someone you barely know? She asked over her shoulder. Wyatt was quiet for a moment. I've been watching you for 3 years, Miss Zimmerman. I know your character. And sometimes life offers unexpected opportunities. I believe this might be one. As they rode north toward his ranch, Delilah found herself wondering if perhaps the day's disaster might somehow be a blessing in disguise. The Quinn ranch house appeared through the swirling snow like a beacon, a solid 2-story structure built from local timber with smoke curling from 2 stone chimneys. As they approached, Delilah noted the well-maintained outbuildings, the sturdy corral, and the general air of prosperity. Welcome to Evergreen Ranch, Wyatt said as they dismounted. He led her inside, where blessed warmth enveloped them immediately. Mrs. Holloway, Wyatt's housekeeper, nearly dropped her wooden spoon when they entered. Mr. Quinn, Miss Zimmerman, good heavens, child, you're soaked through. The older woman bustled forward. What on earth, Mrs. Holloway? Miss Zimmerman needs dry clothes and hot tea, Wyatt interrupted smoothly. And perhaps we could have a fire in the parlor while Mrs. Holloway took Delilah upstairs, clucking and fussing over her condition. Wyatt stoked the parlor fire. By the time Delilah returned downstairs dressed in a borrowed dress that hung loosely on her frame, the parlor was warm. Tea was steeping, and Wyatt had changed into a dry shirt and waistcoat. Please sit, he gestured to the comfortable chair nearest the fire. As Mrs. Holloway served tea and placed a tray of freshly baked scones on the small table between them, Delilah studied Wyatt openly for perhaps the first time. He was older than Henry, perhaps 30 to her 22 years, with a face weathered by sun and wind. His dark hair was neatly trimmed, and his clean-shaven jaw showed a strong, determined line. What struck her most were his eyes, a clear, intelligent green that seemed to see straight through pretenses. Once Mrs. Holloway had retreated to the kitchen, though Delilah suspected she remained within earshot. Wyatt leaned forward. I meant what I said in town, Miss Zimmerman. Delilah wrapped her hands around the warm teacup. I think given your proposal you might call me Delilah. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Delilah, then. Mr. Quinn, Wyatt. Wyatt, she conceded. I appreciate your gallantry, but surely you understand that people don't simply marry strangers. We're hardly strangers. We've lived in the same town for 3 years. Nodding to someone at church and in the general store hardly constitutes a courtship, she pointed out. Wyatt sat back, considering her. You're right. So let me speak plainly. I need a wife. This ranch needs a woman's touch, and I need a partner, someone intelligent and capable. And I need, she hesitated, dignity, a way forward that doesn't involve becoming Valentine's most pitied spinster. Then perhaps we can help each other. He set down his cup. I'm not offering romance, Delilah. I can't promise the kind of love you might have expected with Caldwell, but I can offer respect, security, and kindness. That's more than many marriages begin with, she acknowledged quietly. Indeed. And who knows what might grow from such soil? His expression softened slightly. I'm not asking for an answer today. Stay here tonight. Mrs. Holloway will accommodate you properly, and think on it. If tomorrow you wish to return to town, I'll take you myself with no hard feelings. Delilah studied him, this man who was offering her an escape from humiliation, a fresh start. There was something solid about Wyatt Quinn, a steadiness Henry had lacked. I'll consider it, she finally said. That night, in the guest bedroom with its handmade quilt and spotless curtains, Delilah lay awake listening to the howl of the winter wind. She thought of Henry, who had courted her for a year, whispering sweet promises he apparently never intended to keep. She thought of her parents' marriage, affectionate and steady after 25 years. And she thought of Wyatt Quinn, a man of few words but deliberate actions. By morning, when the sun broke through the clouds and cast diamond-like sparkles across the snow-covered landscape, Delilah had made her decision. She found Wyatt in his study, reviewing ledgers. He stood when she entered, his expression carefully neutral. I have conditions, she said without preamble. A hint of amusement flickered in his eyes. I expected nothing less. I want a real marriage, she continued. Not just in name. I want the opportunity for companionship, children someday. Wyatt's expression became serious. I want those things too, Delilah. And I want to finish my education by correspondence. I've always wanted to become a teacher. I would encourage it, he replied without hesitation. Delilah took a deep breath. Then yes, Wyatt Quinn, I will marry you. The wedding took place 3 days later in the same church where Delilah had been abandoned. This time, however, there was no elaborate ceremony, just Delilah in a simple blue dress Mrs. Holloway had altered for her, Wyatt in his Sunday best, and only her parents and Mrs. Holloway as witnesses. Her parents had been shocked by her decision, but after a long, private conversation with Wyatt, her father had given his blessing with surprising enthusiasm. He's a good man, Delilah, her father had told her, different from Henry in all the right ways. As they exchanged vows, Delilah noticed how Wyatt's hands remained steady while hers trembled slightly. When he slipped the simple gold band onto her finger purchased from the jeweler just that morning, his touch was gentle but sure. I now pronounce you man and wife, the priest declared, looking relieved that this ceremony had reached its proper conclusion. Wyatt's kiss was brief and polite, but Delilah felt an unexpected warmth spread through her chest at the contact. Mrs. Holloway had prepared a small celebration meal back at the ranch, which was now Delilah's home. As they ate roast beef, potatoes, and fresh baked bread, Delilah observed how Wyatt interacted with her parents, respectful, attentive, and unexpectedly charming in his quiet way. After her parents departed with promises to visit soon, Mrs. Holloway tactfully retired early, leaving the newlyweds alone in the parlor. An awkward silence stretched between them until Wyatt finally spoke. I had a room prepared for you upstairs, the blue bedroom. I thought you might want your own space. At first, Delilah appreciated his consideration. Thank you. The ranch hands have been curious about you, he continued, changing the subject. They're good men. I hope you'll meet them tomorrow. "I'd like that," she replied, grateful for the neutral topic. "I want to learn about the ranch. If I'm to be your partner, I should understand your work." Wyatt looked pleased. Most women wouldn't take interest in cattle breeding and grazing rotation. "I'm not most women," she replied with a small smile. "No," he agreed softly. "You're certainly not." That night, alone in her new bedroom, Delilah wondered what the coming weeks and months would bring. She had married a near stranger out of necessity and pride. Yet somehow, as she drifted to sleep beneath the unfamiliar roof, she felt an unexpected sense of possibility. The first weeks of marriage were an education for both of them. Delilah learned the rhythms of ranch life, the pre-dawn breakfasts, the constant work, the satisfaction of seeing immediate results from one's efforts. She insisted on taking over much of the cooking from Mrs. Holloway, who gratefully focused on the cleaning and laundry instead. Wyatt, in turn, discovered the pleasure of returning to a home that felt alive. Delilah brought flowers in from the early spring growth, rearranged furniture to better catch the light, and filled the once quiet evenings with conversation. They maintained separate bedrooms, though Delilah sometimes caught Wyatt watching her with an intensity that made her wonder if he regretted that arrangement. For her part, she was grateful for the time to know him before navigating the intimacy of marriage. One evening in late March, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Wyatt unexpectedly asked, "Are you happy here, Delilah?" She looked up from the book she'd been reading. "I am, more than I expected to be." "No regrets." Delilah considered this. "I regret the circumstances that brought me here. I regret trusting Henry, but marrying you." She shook her head. "No, I don't regret that." Relief visibly washed over his features. "Good, that's good." A comfortable silence fell between them until Wyatt spoke again. "Spring roundup starts next week. The men will be working long hours. I'll be gone before sunrise and back after dark most days." "I understand," she said. "Ranch work doesn't observe regular hours. I thought perhaps—" He hesitated uncharacteristically. "I thought you might like to ride out with me tomorrow, see more of the property. Weather's finally turning." Delilah smiled. "I'd like that very much." The next morning dawned clear and mild, the first truly spring-like day of the year. Wyatt introduced Delilah to Daisy, a gentle bay mare he'd purchased specifically for her. "She's beautiful," Delilah exclaimed, stroking the horse's velvety nose. "I noticed you're comfortable around horses," Wyatt said, helping her mount. "Your father mentioned you used to ride often as a girl." The fact that he had remembered such a detail from conversations with her father warmed her. "I haven't ridden in years." Henry thought it unladylike. Something dark flickered across Wyatt's face. Caldwell was a fool in more ways than one. They rode for hours, with Wyatt pointing out property boundaries, water sources, and grazing areas. He explained his breeding program and his plans for expanding the herd. "You've accomplished so much in just 3 years," Delilah remarked as they stopped to rest the horses near a creek. "This must have been quite wild when you arrived." "It was," he agreed, helping her down from the saddle. His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "But I've always believed in the power of patience and hard work." "Where were you before Valentine?" she asked, realizing how little she knew of his past. Wyatt's expression closed slightly. "Colorado, mostly. Did some mining, some ranching. And before that—" He busied himself retrieving a canteen from his saddlebag. "Missouri. My family had a small farm there." "Do they still?" "They're gone," he said simply. "Fever took my parents and sister when I was 19. Delilah touched his arm gently. "I'm sorry." He nodded, accepting her sympathy without elaboration. "What about you?" "Always lived in Valentine." Grateful for the change of subject, Delilah told him about growing up as the only child of the town's general store owners. She shared stories of her schooling, her dreams of becoming a teacher, and her frustration when her parents had encouraged her to focus on finding a husband instead. Henry seemed the perfect solution, she admitted. Handsome, from a good family, and he promised I could teach after we were married. Would he have kept that promise? Wyatt asked quietly. Delilah considered this. No, she finally said. I see that now. He said many things just to please me in the moment. Some men do, Wyatt agreed. I prefer to promise only what I intend to deliver. Their eyes met, and Delilah felt a flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with hunger. For the first time, she fully appreciated how handsome her husband was, not in Henry's polished, conventional way, but with a rugged authenticity that came from living honestly. The moment was broken when Wyatt's horse snorted impatiently. We should head back, he said, helping her remount. Storm clouds building to the west. As they rode side by side, Delilah found herself studying Wyatt's profile, wondering what it might be like to truly be his wife in every sense. That evening after dinner, Wyatt surprised her with a package. What's this? She asked, untying the brown paper. Your correspondence course, he explained as she revealed several textbooks and papers. For teaching. I wrote to the college in Lincoln. They sent the materials and enrollment forms. Delilah stared at him, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. You remembered. Of course, he said simply. You should pursue your ambitions, Delilah. Being my wife doesn't mean surrendering your dreams. Without thinking, she rose and kissed his cheek impulsively. Thank you. A faint blush colored his tanned face. You're welcome. That night, lying in her bed, Delilah realized something fundamental had shifted between them. She was no longer merely grateful to Wyatt for saving her from humiliation. She was beginning to genuinely care for the man who was her husband. Spring roundup kept Wyatt busy from sunrise until well after sunset each day. Delilah threw herself into making the ranch house truly her home, while diligently working through her correspondence lessons in the evenings. Sometimes Wyatt would join her at the kitchen table, silently reviewing his ledgers while she studied. She enjoyed these quiet moments of companionship, the comfortable silence between them occasionally broken by a question or observation. One evening in early May, Delilah heard a commotion outside and rushed to the door to find several ranch hands helping Wyatt off his horse. He was grimacing in pain, his shirt bloodied along one side. Wyatt, she gasped, rushing forward. It's nothing serious, he assured her through gritted teeth. Young Bull decided to test his horns. Got him good along the ribs, madam, explained Jake, the ranch foreman. Don't think anything's broken, but he's torn up some. Delilah took charge immediately, directing the men to bring Wyatt to the kitchen where the light was best. She sent Mrs. Holloway for hot water, clean cloths, and her small box of medical supplies. With gentle but firm hands, she helped Wyatt remove his shirt, revealing a nasty gash along his left side. She cleaned the wound carefully, conscious of his sharp intake of breath when she touched particularly tender areas. You're good at this, he observed, watching her work. My mother believed every woman should know basic medical care, she explained, applying a salve to the cleaned wound. Hold still now. As she wrapped bandages around his torso, Delilah was acutely aware of his bare skin beneath her fingers, the hard muscle, the scattering of scars that told of a life lived physically, the warmth of him. Her cheeks flushed as she secured the bandage. There, she said, her voice slightly unsteady. You'll need to keep it clean and change the bandage tomorrow. Thank you, he said, his voice deeper than usual. When she looked up, his green eyes were fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Mrs. Holloway cleared her throat from the doorway, breaking the moment. I've prepared a tonic for the pain, Mr. Quinn. Later that night, After ensuring Wyatt was comfortable in his bedroom, Delilah returned to her own room feeling strangely unsettled. The image of her husband's wounded body, strong despite its temporary vulnerability, remained vivid in her mind. She realized with sudden clarity that she didn't want to sleep alone that night, not out of physical desire, though that was certainly awakening within her, but from a deeper need to be near him, to assure herself of his well-being. After an hour of restless tossing, Delilah rose and wrapped her robe around her nightgown. She padded quietly down the hallway to Wyatt's room and knocked softly. "Come in," his voice called immediately, as if he'd been awake as well. Wyatt was propped up against his pillows, a lamp still burning on the bedside table. He looked surprised but not displeased to see her. "Is everything all right?" he asked. "I wanted to check on you," she said, suddenly feeling foolish. "To make sure you weren't in pain." His expression softened. "I'm fine. The tonic helped." Delilah nodded, hesitating at the door. "Good, that's good." Neither spoke for a long moment, then Wyatt pulled back the covers on the empty side of the bed. "Stay," he said quietly, "if you want to." Heart pounding, Delilah crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed. "I was worried," she admitted, "when I saw you bleeding." "I've had worse," he assured her. "That doesn't comfort me," she replied with a small smile. Carefully, mindful of his injury, Wyatt reached for her hand. "I'm glad you came to check on me." Delilah slipped beneath the covers, still wearing her nightgown and robe. She lay on her side, facing him but not touching, acutely aware of crossing a threshold in their relationship. "Good night, Wyatt," she whispered. "Good night, Delilah," he responded, extinguishing the lamp. In the darkness, his hand found hers again, and they fell asleep with fingers entwined. When Delilah woke the next morning, she found herself curled against Wyatt's uninjured side, his arm around her. For a moment, she simply enjoyed the warmth and closeness, the steady rise and fall of his chest beneath her cheek. "Good morning," he murmured, voice rough with sleep. She looked up to find him watching her, his expression unguarded in a way she'd never seen before. "Good morning. How do you feel?" "Better," he said, his thumb tracing small circles on her shoulder. "Much better." From that morning forward, they shared a bed each night. At first, they simply slept side by side, gradually growing more comfortable with casual touches and morning embraces. Wyatt never pressed for more, seeming content to follow Delilah's lead. 2 weeks after the injury, as spring fully blossomed across the ranch, Delilah made her decision. After dinner, she asked Mrs. Holloway not to wait up, then took Wyatt's hand and led him upstairs to their now shared bedroom. With trembling fingers but determined heart, she began unbuttoning her dress. "I want to be your wife," she said softly, "in every way." Wyatt stepped forward, covering her hands with his. "Are you certain completely?" she whispered. That night, with gentle patience, Wyatt showed her physical pleasure she hadn't known was possible. Afterward, lying in his arms as moonlight filtered through the curtains, Delilah realized their marriage of convenience had transformed into something far deeper, something that resembled the love her parents shared. "I never expected this," she confessed, her head resting on his chest. "What?" he asked, fingers trailing through her loose hair. "To feel this way about you. When you proposed that day in the snow, I thought we might build a partnership, maybe friendship. And now," his voice held a hint of vulnerability she rarely heard. Delilah raised herself on one elbow to look into his eyes. "Now I find myself falling in love with my husband." The smile that spread across Wyatt's face was radiant. "I've loved you since before you knew my name," he admitted. "I used to find excuses to visit town just to catch a glimpse of you." "Why didn't you court me properly?" she asked. "Before Henry, I mean." Wyatt's expression grew serious. "I wasn't ready. When I came to Valentine, I was still healing From things in my past. I didn't think I had the right to bring someone else into my life then. Delilah touched his face gently. And now I thank God every day for Henry Caldwell's cowardice, he said, pulling her close. It brought me the greatest blessing of my life. Summer arrived with long sun-drenched days and brief, star-filled nights. Delilah blossomed in her role as Mrs. Quinn. She managed the household efficiently, completed her teaching courses with distinction, and even began helping Wyatt with the ranch's bookkeeping. In late June, when Delilah missed her monthly cycle, she suspected what it might mean. By July, she was certain. One evening after dinner, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, she shared her news. "Wyatt," she said, taking his hand, "I'm going to have a baby." His expression transformed from surprise to wonder to joy in the space of heartbeats. Without a word, he pulled her into his arms, burying his face against her neck. "A baby," he finally whispered. "Our baby." That night, as they lay in bed discussing names and plans, Wyatt suddenly grew serious. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. "Something I should have told you before we married." Delilah felt a flicker of apprehension. "What is it?" Wyatt sat up, running a hand through his hair. "Before I came to Valentine, I was involved in something I'm not proud of." "In Colorado," she prompted gently. He nodded. "I worked as an enforcer for a cattle baron named Rutledge. He was expanding his territory by any means necessary: intimidation, violence, even murder. I didn't know the full extent when I hired on, but once I realized." "What happened?" Delilah asked, taking his hand. "There was a small rancher named Peterson. Good man with a young family. Rutledge wanted his water rights, sent me and 2 others to convince him to sell." Wyatt's voice grew tight. "Things went wrong. Peterson was shot, not by me, but I was there. He survived, but I couldn't stomach it anymore. I testified against Rutledge and his men, then came here to start fresh." Delilah absorbed this information, studying her husband's face. "Is that why you're so private? Why you stayed away from town?" "Partly," he admitted. "Rutledge has connections, and I was ashamed. Didn't feel worthy of building relationships." "Until me," she said softly. "Until you," he agreed. "Delilah, I understand if this changes how you feel." She pressed her fingers to his lips. "We all have pasts, Wyatt. What matters is you chose to do right, even when it was difficult. That's the man I love, the man who will be father to our child." Relief washed over his features as he gathered her close. "I don't deserve you." "Perhaps not," she teased gently, "but you're stuck with me nonetheless." As summer faded into autumn, Delilah's body changed with her advancing pregnancy. Wyatt treated her like precious glass, though she insisted on maintaining most of her duties around the ranch. Their happiness seemed complete when a letter arrived from the school board in early October. "They've offered me a teaching position for next fall," Delilah announced excitedly. "After the baby is old enough." Wyatt lifted her in a careful embrace. "I told you they'd be fools not to hire the most educated woman in the county." Their peaceful existence was interrupted in late November when Mrs. Holloway burst into the kitchen one morning, her face pale. "Mr. Quinn, there's men coming, 4 riders, armed." Wyatt's expression hardened instantly. He moved to the window, then turned to Delilah. "Stay inside with Mrs. Holloway. No matter what happens, don't come out until I call for you." Fear gripped Delilah's heart as she watched her husband retrieve his rifle from the cabinet. "Wyatt, who is it?" "Probably nothing," he said, though his tone belied his words. "Just stay safe." From the kitchen window, Delilah watched Wyatt stride out to meet the approaching riders, Jake and 2 other ranch hands flanking him. The men pulled up in the yard, dust swirling around their horses. The leader, a sharp-featured man with a silver-streaked beard, dismounted slowly. Though Delilah couldn't hear the conversation, She could see the tension in Wyatt's posture. After several minutes of what appeared to be heated exchange, the bearded man remounted his horse. As the group turned to leave, he called something over his shoulder that made Wyatt's hands clench into fists. When Wyatt finally returned to the house, his face was grim. "Who were they?" Delilah demanded. "Rutledge's men," he confirmed her fears. "He's out of prison. Apparently he's been looking for me." Delilah's hand went protectively to her swollen belly. "What did they want?" "To deliver a message. Rutledge hasn't forgotten my testimony." Wyatt ran a hand over his face. "They're staying in Valentine for a few days. Said they'd be back if I didn't meet with Rutledge at the hotel." "You can't go," Delilah insisted, fear making her voice sharp. "It's obviously a trap. If I don't, they'll come here again," Wyatt replied. "And next time they might not just talk." That evening, as heavy snow began to fall, Wyatt and Delilah discussed their options. In the end, they decided Wyatt would ride into town the following morning with several ranch hands as backup. He would meet Rutledge in the public hotel dining room, hear what the man had to say, and hopefully put an end to the threat. "I won't risk you or our child," Wyatt said as they lay in bed that night, his hand resting protectively over her belly. "Whatever it takes." "Just come back to us," Delilah whispered. "That's all that matters." The next morning dawned cold and clear, the fresh snow glistening like diamonds in the sunlight. Delilah stood on the porch, wrapped in Wyatt's coat, the same one he'd given her that fateful February day, and watched her husband ride toward town with 4 of his most trusted men. The day passed with excruciating slowness. Delilah tried to focus on her usual tasks and preparations for Christmas, which was just 3 weeks away. But her mind constantly returned to Wyatt and the danger he might be facing. When she heard hoofbeats approaching late that afternoon, she rushed to the door, heart in her throat. Relief washed over her at the sight of Wyatt riding into the yard alone but apparently unharmed. She met him at the steps, searching his face. "What happened?" Wyatt dismounted slowly, his expression unreadable. "Rutledge wanted money, a lot of it, said it was compensation for his time in prison." "And I paid him," Wyatt said simply. "Every cent we had saved, it's gone." Delilah blinked in surprise. They had been saving diligently for 3 years, building a substantial reserve. "All of it," Wyatt nodded grimly. "He's gone. Took the night train east with his men. Sheriff confirmed it." "Then it's over," he agreed, finally allowing exhaustion to show on his face. "But our savings," Delilah, she placed her finger against his lips. "We have the ranch, we have each other, we have our child coming. Money can be earned again." Wyatt pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "I was so afraid he'd find a way to hurt you." "I'm fine," she assured him. "We're fine." That night, as snow fell gently outside their window, they held each other close, grateful for safety and the promise of tomorrow. Christmas came with a fresh blanket of snow and a sense of renewed peace. Though their financial situation was leaner than expected, Wyatt and Delilah found joy in simple pleasures, decorating the house with pine boughs, baking cookies with Mrs. Holloway, exchanging modest gifts by the fire. "I have something special for you," Wyatt said on Christmas morning, placing a small package in Delilah's hands. She unwrapped it carefully to find a delicate silver locket. Inside was a tiny portrait of Wyatt on one side, with space left empty on the other. "For the baby," he explained. "Once he or she arrives." Tears welled in Delilah's eyes as she fastened the locket around her neck. "It's perfect." "There's something else," Wyatt added. From his pocket he withdrew a folded document. "This is the deed to the ranch. I've had it modified to include your name alongside mine. Equal partners in everything." Delilah stared at the paper, understanding the significance of such a gesture in 1878, Few women owned property, especially married women. "Wyatt, this is only right," he finished for her. "If anything ever happens to me, you and our child will always have this land." She kissed him then, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. When they finally parted, Wyatt rested his forehead against hers. "Best Christmas of my life," he murmured. January brought bitter cold and heavy snow that isolated the ranch for days at a time. Delilah's pregnancy advanced to its final stages, bringing both excitement and occasional discomfort. "The baby's restless today," she remarked one evening as they sat by the fire, her hands moving over her rounded belly. Wyatt placed his large hand beside hers, grinning when he felt a strong kick. "Takes after his mother, always busy," or her father, Delilah countered, "always working." They had this playful debate often whether the child would be a boy or girl, and which parent it might favor in temperament and appearance. "Either way," Wyatt said softly, "this child is already deeply loved." The baby arrived during a fierce February blizzard, almost exactly 1 year after Wyatt and Delilah had met. Mrs. Holloway sent one of the ranch hands for the doctor, but the snowdrifts were too high for him to reach the ranch. "Baby's not waiting, Mrs. Holloway declared as Delilah's labor progressed rapidly. "We'll manage just fine." Wyatt refused to leave his wife's side, holding her hand through each contraction, wiping her brow, and murmuring encouragement. When Delilah's strength began to flag in the early hours of morning, his steady presence gave her the courage to continue. "You can do this," he told her. "You're the strongest person I know." After 18 hours of labor, their son entered the world with a lusty cry that belied his small size. Mrs. Holloway cleaned and swaddled him while Wyatt held Delilah close, both of them tearful with joy and relief. "He's perfect," Wyatt whispered when Mrs. Holloway placed the tiny bundle in Delilah's arms. "Just like his mother." They named him William Thomas Quinn, William for Wyatt's father, Thomas for Delilah's. As February turned to March, the small family settled into new rhythms dictated by the baby's needs. Wyatt proved to be a doting father, often carrying William around the ranch in a sling Mrs. Holloway fashioned, pointing out cattle and horses to the wide-eyed infant. Spring brought renewal to the land and to the Quinn family's fortunes. The cattle market improved, and Wyatt's careful breeding program began to show results in the quality of their herd. By summer, they had rebuilt much of their savings. In September, as promised, Delilah began teaching 3 days a week at the Valentine schoolhouse. Mrs. Holloway cared for William on those days, though Wyatt often brought the baby to meet his mother at lunchtime, much to the delight of her students. "The children love when you visit," Delilah told him one afternoon as they walked home together, William sleeping peacefully in his father's arms. "They love seeing William," Wyatt corrected with a smile. "I'm just the delivery service." Delilah laughed, linking her arm through his free one. "They admire you, especially the boys. I heard Tommy Morris telling the others he wants to be a rancher like Mr. Quinn when he grows up." Wyatt looked genuinely pleased at this. "Good kid, Tommy. Smart, too. He reminds me a bit of myself at that age." As they reached the edge of town, they passed the church where, nearly 2 years earlier, Delilah had stood abandoned in her wedding gown. She paused, looking at the building thoughtfully. "Sometimes I think I should thank Henry," she mused. Wyatt raised an eyebrow. "For leaving you at the altar, in a snowstorm. For giving me the opportunity to find real happiness," she clarified. "If he hadn't been such a coward, I might have married him and spent my life with the wrong man." Wyatt shifted William to his shoulder, freeing one arm to pull Delilah close against his side. "His loss, my immeasurable gain." They were about to continue home when the stagecoach rumbled into town, drawing their attention. As passengers disembarked, Delilah froze, her grip on Wyatt's arm tightening. Among the travelers was a familiar figure, Henry Caldwell, looking much as he had when he'd left town nearly 2 years before. "Delilah," Wyatt's voice held concern. "Do you want to go another way?" She considered this, then straightened her shoulders. "No, this is our town. We have nothing to hide." They continued walking, and it was inevitable that their paths would cross with Henry's on the narrow boardwalk. When he noticed them, his step faltered, his expression cycling through surprise, confusion, and something like regret. "Delilah," he said, tipping his hat awkwardly. His gaze moved to Wyatt, then to the baby sleeping against his shoulder. "Mr. Quinn." "Caldwell," Wyatt acknowledged coolly. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them until Delilah spoke. "Welcome back to Valentine, Henry." "Are you visiting family?" Henry shifted uncomfortably. "Actually, I'm moving back. My venture in Chicago it didn't work out as planned." "I'm sorry to hear that," Delilah said with genuine civility though no sympathy. Henry's gaze lingered on William. "Your son?" "Yes," Delilah replied, unable to keep the pride from her voice. "William, he's 6 months old now. He's a fine boy," Henry said, his expression difficult to read. You look well." "We are," Wyatt confirmed, his arm still protective around Delilah's waist. Another awkward pause, then Henry cleared his throat. "I should go. My parents are expecting me." As he turned to leave, Delilah called after him. "Henry." He turned back, hope flickering briefly in his eyes. "I wish you well," she said simply. "Truly." Something like understanding passed between them, acknowledgement of a past that had led them both to very different presents. Henry nodded once. "Thank you, Delilah. I'm glad you found happiness." As they watched him walk away, Wyatt pressed a kiss to Delilah's temple. "You're a better person than I am." "Not better," she disagreed. "Just at peace. What he did led me to you, to William, to this life I love. How could I hold on to anger?" That evening, after William was asleep in his cradle, Wyatt and Delilah sat on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues of orange and gold. The ranch stretched before them, cattle grazing in the distance, outbuildings neat and well-maintained, fields ready for the coming harvest. "I was thinking," Wyatt said, his arm around her shoulders, "maybe we should start planning for another baby." Delilah smiled, leaning into his embrace. "William's not even crawling yet." "I know," he acknowledged, "but I like the idea of a house full of children. Little ones running around, learning to ride, helping with chores." "With that image in mind," Delilah said, turning to face him with a mischievous smile, "I have something to tell you." Wyatt's eyes widened with understanding. "Delilah, are you?" She nodded, laughing at his expression of shock and delight. "Dr. Matthews confirmed it yesterday. Around February, he thinks." "Another winter baby," Wyatt marveled, pulling her into a tender kiss. "I think February is becoming quite significant for us," she murmured against his lips. As twilight deepened around them, they remained on the porch, discussing names and making plans. When the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Wyatt pointed them out. "My father used to say that stars are God's way of reminding us that even in darkness, there is always light to guide us home," he said softly. Delilah rested her head against his shoulder. He was right. In the years that followed, the Quinn family flourished along with their ranch. William was joined by a sister, Emma Rose, born as predicted in February 1880. 2 years later, twins Michael and Matthew completed their family, bringing joyful chaos to the ranch house. Delilah continued teaching until the school board eventually offered her the position of headmistress, a role she balanced with motherhood and ranch responsibilities. Wyatt expanded the ranch operations, adding sheep and horses to their cattle business, becoming one of the most respected ranchers in the territory. They faced challenges, of course, drought years, economic downturns, childhood illnesses, and the inevitable conflicts that arise in any marriage. But through it all, they maintained the partnership that had begun that snowy February day when a heartbroken bride found unexpected salvation in a cowboy's simple proposal. On their 20th anniversary, with their children nearly grown, Wyatt surprised Delilah with a trip to San Francisco, a city she had always dreamed of visiting. As they stood on the deck of a ferry crossing the bay, watching the sun set behind the Golden Gate, Wyatt wrapped his coat around her shoulders against the evening chill. "Reminds me of another coat, another February day," he said, his arms encircling her from behind. Delilah smiled, leaning back against his chest. "Best day of my life, though I didn't know it at the time." "Mine too," he agreed. "I took quite a chance that day." "We both did," she replied, turning in his arms to face him. Though time had added silver to his dark hair and lines around his eyes, she still saw the same steadfast heart that had offered her dignity when she needed it most. "Would you do it again?" he asked, his expression suddenly boyishly uncertain. "Marry a near stranger in the midst of heartbreak?" Delilah reached up to touch his beloved face. "In a heartbeat. Only you were never really a stranger, were you? You were just waiting for me to notice you were there." "I would have waited forever," he admitted. "Thank goodness it didn't take that long," she teased, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. As the ferry continued its journey across the bay, Delilah Quinn reflected on the extraordinary turn her life had taken on that winter day in 1878. What had begun as the worst moment of her life, abandoned and humiliated, had transformed into the beginning of a love story more beautiful than any she could have imagined. Sometimes, she thought, the greatest blessings arrive disguised as heartbreak. Sometimes, happiness awaits just beyond our greatest disappointment. And sometimes, a simple act of kindness like a coat offered in a snowstorm can change the course of two lives forever.